Evening, everybody in the room and across the world. And it's a great pleasure to start the Parks Institute seminar series this year with perhaps one of the most Parksian events we've had for some time, with the overall title Anti-Judaism, Antisemitism and the Holocaust, the Weight and Consequences. So we've got three speakers who will all talk for about 20 minutes, and then we will open it up for questions. And I'm very delighted I'll introduce each speaker in turn. And first of all, to introduce someone that's very familiar to us at the Parks Institute, Carolyn Sanzenbacher, who has been first a PhD student and then a postdoctoral part of the Parks team for many years. And we're delighted to have this event, which is partly to mark her recent book, which is a remarkable achievement, Tracking the Jews, Ecumenical Protestants, Conversion and the Holocaust. And Carolyn will talk tonight. And we're so delighted to see you because 2 minutes ago we couldn't see you at all. And she is going to be talking this evening on solving the Jewish problem through conversion, anti-Judaism or anti-Semitism. Carolyn.
Thank you, Tony. Can I check very quickly to see if this PowerPoint will come up? Is it going to show for you?
Yes. Sure.
Yeah, okay.
No, we don't see a PowerPoint. Do you have a PowerPoint?
You don't? Okay. Do I need to click anything? Do I need to do anything? It's there. It's showing on my screen.
Have you clicked share?
Do you
Have
see
you
it?
need to share the screen.
In green.
What? Sorry?
There's a
need
button
to share
share.
Oh, wait just a minute. It just disappeared. What? Okay, where's share screen? Okay. So when I click that, it will come up. Okay.
And then you need to select your PowerPoint. We still don't see it.
It's already here. It's already here. I'd like to begin our discussion tonight by calling attention to the high degree of Christian commentary on the so-called Jewish problem during the Hitler years. While it held true across international Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox lines, I would like to focus here on the ways in which it was used by an international network of mainstream Protestants as reason for world expansion of Jewish evangelization. To grasp the context and scope of this accepted idea, it will be helpful to look first at the structure from which it emerged. Now see, is it coming up? It's not going to come up. I can't get it to come up. There. Is it coming? Do you have it now?
No, we don't see it.
Okay, we'll have to do without. I'm sorry. I don't know how to get out of here. This is terrible. I'll just go ahead and talk. I can't. No, I'm being blocked by something.
Are you able to reopen the Zoom page so you can see us on the screen? Sorry, I'm behind the camera, but I'm in the room. And then at the bottom there should be.
I can't see it. It won't open for some reason. There. Okay.
There should be a button in green that says share, and then you click it.
I don't see it. It's not there. It's covered by the screen. Wait just a minute. Okay, there. Now, do I click it again?
Once you click share, it should pop up a little window that will show all your different windows that you have open on.
I don't know how to get rid of this. Wait, I will not do the PowerPoint. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry, I'm very sorry about this. Okay, to grasp the structure and scope of this accepted idea, it will be helpful to look first at the structure from which it emerged. In August 1925, an historic world conference in Stockholm, Sweden, brought into existence the first centralizing body of the Protestant ecumenical movement, which would later coalesce into the World Council of Churches. Along with that decision, the delegates from 37 nations unanimously affirmed the need to mobilize international Christian forces in the area of burning social problems. 2 months later, the missionary arm of the movement issued a call from the pages of a standard Protestant journal for Christian experts to take up the study of the Jewish problem at an International Missionary World Conference. The opening words of that call, "The challenge of the Jew is perennial and has in our time become all but universal," set the tone of urgency that permeated the 10-page article. Post-war countries everywhere were said to be faced with a Jewish problem that required immediate Christian thought and action. The situation eliciting the urgency was said to have been brought about by the universal attainment of political and social rights for Jews, the movement of Jews into all critical domains of society, and the concomitant increase in Jewish influence. Simultaneously occurring, according to the report, was the disintegration of Judaism, increasing Jewish racial consciousness, and increasing movements of Jews toward Bolshevism, Zionism, and atheism, all of which were framed as a development of great danger to the world unless directed into Christian channels. The response to this published call for Christian experts was swift and broad. By 1927, the unanimous agreement of 175 delegates from mainstream Protestant organizations in 26 countries had given rise to a series of European Conference findings on relations between a universal Jewish problem and the societal need for Jewish conversion. In 1929, the International Committee on the Christian Approach to Jews, whose theoretical base was grounded in the claims of those findings, was brought into existence as a planning and lobbying body to centralize efforts for world missions to Jews. By 1930, a full-time director had been hired to spend 6 months of each year on either side of the Atlantic, crisscrossing the European and North American continents with the aims and arguments of that goal. By the eve of Hitler's rise, with regional sectors in continental Europe, Britain, and North America, the enterprise was a fully constituted body, a brand name program of Jewish evangelization recognized in 36 countries, and a self-christened agent for educating Protestant churches on the right Christian attitude toward Jews and Jewish missions. This, in very broad strokes, was the context and framework within which a conversionary solution to the Jewish problem was developed and delivered to international Protestant audiences in the Hitler years. None of this emanated from the periphery. The ideas and arguments that set into motion its creation and advancement arose from within mainstream Protestantism. Equally important is that the resulting discourse was comprised of an integrated collection of transnational beliefs. Any idea that appeared in the widely disseminated discourse had already thrived somewhere within the mainstream Protestant populations represented by the initiative. To understand the complexity of the discourse, it is important to recognize the duality of its purpose. Conversion of Jews was seen as the highest mark of Christian benevolence, as well as a method of reparation for historical Christian injustices to Jews, which was understood to have hindered earlier mission efforts. There was also the belief that the church was being called to a new tolerance and love for Jews, and these combined made up the salvation aspect of an emerging vision of Christian benevolence. The other aspect was comprised of a socio-political awareness of the Jewish problem and the Christian duty to solve it, which involved two different modes of defense: defense of Christianity against the so-called incursions of modern Jewry, and defense of the church against the anti-Christian nature of racial antisemitism, which included protests against racial claims leveled at Jews. The goal was to educate and rally a collective sense of solidarity and unity surrounding this duality of purpose so that Jewish evangelization would become an everyday responsibility of every church in every nation of the world. Conflation of these seemingly contradictory aspects was a central feature of the discourse from the start. As such, traditional calls to bring Jews to their spiritual destiny were complexly layered with beliefs, ideas, and arguments about the need for Jewish evangelization and the Christian duty to stand in defense of the Christian worldview. Excuse me. The idea of a Jewish problem figured prominently in the initiative's attempts to educate Protestant audiences on a connection between the Christian duty of evangelical witness to Jews and the realities of Christian-Jewish coexistence, and it often did so in the context of race. Beginning with the claim that a Jewish problem would not have emerged if the church had not failed historically to convert world Jewry, arguments about Jewish influence, Jewish involvement in anti-religious movements, and Jewish racial consciousness repeatedly pointed to Jews as a race with society-troubling attributes. This line of argument increased after Hitler's 1933 rise to power and German state efforts to legislate what was openly framed as a Jewish problem. In the first 9 months of that year, the European lectures and reports of the initiative emphasized a vicious circle of rising anti-Semitism in which modern Jews were said to be caught. The idea at work was that a renaissance of Jewishness rooted in racial and national aspirations was provoking an increasing anti-Semitic backlash, which in turn provoked increased racially conscious Jewishness and vice versa in a deadlock vicious circle. The elaboration of this included an illustration chart on the disappearance of Jew. The presumptive argument was that anti-Semitism would disappear when did Jewishness, but that anti-Semitism would increase so long as Jewishness was preserved. In contrast, if Jews assented to assimilation and conversion, toleration would follow as Jewishness and Jew disappeared. That Jews had to choose between preservation of Jewishness and persecution or assimilation and disappearance of Jewishness was posited as a critical dilemma not only for Jews. Christians, too, had to act on the seriousness of this situation, for unless Christianity Christianized Jewry, Jewry would Judaize the world, and in modern Jewry today, the anti-religious, atheistic, and unscrupulous Jew was gaining the ascendancy. I'm very sorry that you can't see these in quotes. The image of Jewish assimilation without conversion was forebodingly conveyed in a standard Protestant journal the following year when posing the question, shall Jewry disappear in humanity like salt in a solution, no longer existent as Jewry, but permeating all mankind with Jewish spirit and influence? In other publications, the emphasizing plea was more plainly stated, but always in the twin context of benevolent intentions and modern Jewry as a threat. The other quotation that you were going to be shown is this: Jews had to be won to Christ to save them from becoming a problem and a menace to the Christian faith. The need was never greater than today in view of the geographical dispersion of the Jews to the ends of the earth, his racial pride, his aggressiveness. The steady repetition of these claims throughout the 1930s brought home with intended force that modern Jewry was increasingly atheistic and that Jewish racial loyalties increased as atheistic Jewry evolved. International Protestant audiences were urged to find, love, and evangelize the Jews in their regions on the one hand, and warned about the dangers of an increasingly atheistic, nationalistic, and racially conscious Jewry on the other. Within this conflated discourse, equations between modern Jewry and Nazism began to appear almost as soon as Hitler ascended to power, the most common of which was that Jewish racial consciousness was more or less identical with the racial emphasis of Hitler and his followers. Traditional supersessionist beliefs about the divinely imposed suffering of Jews were also at play in the discourse, namely that God used the scourge of anti-Semitism to turn Jews to Christ. To further problematize the conflated discourse, important parts of it included vigorous protests against racial anti-Semitism, exhortations to seek Christian justice for Jews, and robust calls for support of non-Aryan Christian refugees. The calls to unite in an alliance against racial anti-Semitism and strive for Christian justice, however, did not cancel out the accompanying warnings about the threats of Jewishness, Judaization, and Jewish causes of anti-Semitism, nor were they intended to do so. The claims of education and warning to Protestant audiences were as central to the discourse as the juxtaposed claims of Christian benevolence and salvation in which they were wrapped. Together, just a few points about this brief illustration of Christian complicity during the Holocaust years. What we have here is a richly documented case of international Protestants who protested against the anti-Christian elements of Nazi racial anti-Semitism, but nevertheless advanced anti-Semitism by way of anti-Jewish concepts, images, claims, and arguments that repeatedly pointed to modern Jewry as a problem and threat. That this portrait of Jews was developed, dispensed, and accepted in international circles at the same time that Nazism was seeking its own solution to the so-called Jewish problem cannot be whitewashed as something less serious than it was. In considering the weight and consequences of this discourse, where every claim about a Jewish threat to Christianity carried the potential of legitimizing Nazi claims about the Jewish threat, the question is not whether the goal of conversionary solution was reached, but rather at what expense to Jews it was pursued. In the same vein, I would also like to suggest that the most burning question about what to call this discourse is not whether it should be labeled anti-Judaism or anti-Semitism, as if calling it by the former made it any less inflammatory than it was. The deeper issue in both cases is whether the words, concepts, and arguments of this claimed moral authority caused harm to Jews by providing legitimacy to Nazi claims, fueling anti-Semitism, offsetting compassion, instilling confusion, or in other ways contributing to the passive acceptance of Nazi anti-Jewish policies and persecutions. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, for starting us off and for your excellent and succinct paper. And I would really recommend everyone here and online to look at her book, which has just come out, Tracking the Jews, which is richly researched and a very subtle and persuasive, important book. That moves very neatly onto our second speaker, John Roth, who is the Edward J. Sexton Professor of Philosophy Emeritus at Claremont McKenna College. John has written or edited over 50 books, which is remarkable in itself, and most recently has edited a book which is very much of the now, Stress Test the Israel-Hamas War and Christian-Jewish Relations, which will be coming out next year. So John is going to follow Carolyn, and his talk is entitled, "What is Anti-Semitism?" John.
Thank you, Tony, and Carolyn, thank you for your presentation, which really does kind of filter into the more general question of what is anti-Semitism. And I think my talk will follow pretty well on what you have said at the opening, but it will go in a little bit of a more contemporary mood toward the end of my comments. So, in 1879 and 1880, Heinrich von Treitschke, an influential German historian, published a series of articles that drew attention to a fateful phrase, "Die Juden sind unser Unglück." The Jews are our misfortune. Eventually, that slogan would be festooned at Nazi party rallies. About the time that Treitschke's essays appeared, another German writer, the anti-Jewish journalist Wilhelm Marr, coined the term antisemitism. He used it to replace the conventional German term Judenhass to refer to his Jew hatred, because that way of speaking carried religious connotations that Marr wanted to de-emphasize in favor of racial ones. Seeming more scientific, Marr's antisemitismus caught on. Eventually, it became a way of speaking about all the forms of hostility experienced by Jews throughout history. Identified briefly and broadly, antisemitism refers to negative emotions, beliefs, and practices focused on Jews as Jews. What I will call traditional pre-state of Israel antisemitism has taken various but related forms: religious, political, economic, social, and racial. Jews have been discriminated against, hated, and killed because prejudiced non-Jews believed they belonged to the wrong religion, lacked citizenship qualifications, practiced business improperly, behaved inappropriately, or possessed inferior racial characteristics. These forms of antisemitism, but especially the racial one, all played key parts in the Holocaust. According to the Nazis' racist outlook, Jews could do nothing to change their blood and the identity and character flowing in and through it. A Jew was a Jew no matter what, and Jews were a menace to the superior non-Jewish societies in which they lived. Racial antisemitism meant that the very existence of Jewish life had become a problem that eventually required a final solution. Once linked, antisemitism and racism inflamed each other. But the racial antisemitism could never have arisen had it not been for the pre-racial forms of antisemitism that were at its roots. Although Jewish identity is ordinarily passed from parent to child, anyone in principle can convert and be Jewish. Therefore, Nazi ideology to the contrary notwithstanding, racial characteristics cannot define Jews in any essential way. Jews must be identified in other ways before it is possible to impute racial identity to them. Thus, behavior, what Jews do or do not do, becomes crucial in defining identity prior to the imputation of racial differences. Behavior, however, is also problematic in establishing distinctively Jewish identity. At least that is true if one focuses not only on the work that Jews do, the professions they practice, the economic plans or political persuasions they possess, For in and of themselves, those roles too can usually be filled by all kinds of people. There is, however, at least one distinguishing and far-ranging behavioral difference. Not all Jews are religious. Nevertheless, religion is at the core of differences that originally set Jews apart. Religion involves more than particular beliefs. It lives in specific practices too. Jews not only worshiped but one God exclusively, they also observed a special Sabbath and distinctive holidays such as Passover. They practiced circumcision, adhered to special dietary restrictions, and regarded Jerusalem as the holy city. Informed by Judaism, their singular religion, Jews were different. They were other. In addition, religious particularity is crucial when it comes to understanding the anti-Jewish feelings that have long been embedded in Christianity. Absent Christian hostility toward Jews, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to explain why Jews were so consistently targets for discrimination and persecution in Western civilization, and why specifically they were eventually set up for the kill in Hitler's Germany. I have long believed that a devastating equation holds. No Christianity equals no Holocaust. It is important to understand what that equation does not say as well as what it does. First, the relationship between Jews and Christians is asymmetrical. Although Jews and Christians are involved historically in countless ways, nothing in Jewish life logically or theologically entails Christian existence. Christian life, however, does depend fundamentally on Jewish life. Christianity makes no sense. It would not even exist if the world contained no Jewish history. But Jews could certainly have existed and perhaps even flourished far more than they have without Christian existence of any kind. In theory, therefore, the world's history could have unfolded so that there were Jews, but no Christians. Second, the possibility just described could not automatically mean that Jews would forever be protected from genocide. In a world devoid of Christian identity, some human group might still have focused on Jews in such a way as to doom them. It could have been possible for the world's history to unfold so there were no Christians, but genocide against Jews still took place. In theory, then, Christianity was not necessary for genocide against the Jews. History, however, unfolds not in theory, but in practice. So while genocide against Jews did not logically necessitate the existence of Christianity as one of the conditions that had to be present to make it possible, nevertheless, Christianity was in fact a practical necessary condition for the Holocaust that actually happened. Nazi Germany's targeting of the Jews in the Holocaust cannot be explained apart from anti-Jewish stereotypes, Christ killer, willful blasphemers, unrepentant sons and daughters of the devil, to name only a few, that have been deeply rooted in Christian practices. Long antedating Nazism, those images and the institutions and social relationships that established and supported them played key parts in foreshadowing and bolstering the Third Reich's genocidal racial antisemitism. Furthermore, it is crucial to note that Christian and Nazi forms of antisemitism have more continuity than discontinuity among them. Christianity wanted Jews to disappear through conversion, but it wanted them to disappear nonetheless. If Jews didn't convert, their misfortune could make them a witness people to testify that no good comes from rejecting Jesus as the Messiah. Well before the Nazi Party struggled its way into existence in the aftermath of World War I, anti-Semitism was so axiomatic in Christian-dominated cultures that with few exceptions, Jews could be fully included within Western civilization's fundamentally Christian-defined boundaries of moral obligation only if they utterly rejected their Jewishness, which, understandably, most Jews chose not to do. The Nazis implemented a more murderous final solution. But absent Christianity's fundamentally anti-Jewish posture, especially the teaching of contempt toward Judaism and Jews, it would be difficult to explain why Hitler's Germany targeted Jews as it did. In addition, that same Christian anti-Semitism goes a long way to explain why overtly Christian resistance to the Holocaust was as scarce and sporadic as it turned out to be. The dominant worldview made Jews outsiders to such a degree that help in their times of acute need was unlikely to be much of a priority. Much more likely, Jewish misfortune would be observed indifferently, with mild regret at most, or interpreted and exacerbated as deserved. In some Christian quarters, outright elimination of the Jews may have been viewed as beneficial, even if murderous means to that end were deemed unfortunate. Resistance to those attitudes and actions could be found, but it consisted of exceptions. Important exceptions, but exceptions nonetheless, that prove the rule. Owing to its deep-seated anti-Semitism, Christianity carries a heavy burden of responsibility for Nazi Germany's destruction of the European Jews. Now, fast forward to October 2024, the eve of Rosh Hashanah, and the new year we so much need. One might hope that the Holocaust, awareness and education about it, including Christianity's complicity in the genocide, would have a significant ethical impact that curbs, if not eliminates, anti-Semitism. One might even hope that Christian pronouncements condemning anti-Semitism as sinful, or that Christian support for the founding and defense of the post-Holocaust state of Israel would help to make anti-Semitism anathema. Such hopes have not been entirely misplaced, but they have proved far too optimistic. Despite the Holocaust, despite large investments in Holocaust education, despite repeated church statements opposing anti-Semitism, despite or even because of the state of Israel, the scourge of anti-Semitism, whipped by political grievance and economic unrest, xenophobia and racism, a long-standing and perhaps irresolvable Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and spread by the internet and seemingly uncontrollable social media, is resurgent as we speak. Today's anti-Semitism is not that of one's grandparents' or even parents' generation. It is a mutating, morphing, viral blend of pre- and post-Holocaust anti-Semitism, contagious, virulent, toxic, and with no vaccine to stop it. Analyze contemporary racism, campus unrest, white supremacy, contested elections, conspiracy theories that spread on the internet. Close by, anti-Semitism, including synagogue bombings, will be intensifying them and getting intensified in turn. That is because anti-Semitism easily befriends and encourages all sorts of us, them, and we, they divisions. The feedback loop of those divisions goes back repeatedly to suspicions and allegations, discrimination, and even violence against Jews. Discrimination breeds discrimination. Hatred spawns hatred. Like a virus that morphs into more resistant strains, 21st century anti-Semitism is related to, and yet significantly different from, that used by and inflicted upon previous generations. Its end game is no longer the gas chambers and crematoria of Auschwitz, but the specter of a nuclear-armed anti-Semitism aimed particularly, but not only, at Israel, is scarcely unthinkable. Will anti-Semitism's vicious circle be unbroken? Probably not anytime soon, because nothing has done more to recharge anti-Semitism than the current Israel-Hamas war, which spirals now from Gaza to Lebanon as Hezbollah and the Israel Defense Forces clash across precarious borders. Even before October 7th, 2023, when Hamas launched its brutal attack against Israel, various organizations produced documents that restated definitions of anti-Semitism and sought to delineate, especially when reproach of the state of Israel crosses the line between anti-Semitism and legitimate criticism. In February 2021, for example, the Nexus Project, a broad coalition of academics, community leaders, activists, and clergy from a wide range of Jewish American community organizations, issued a document called Understanding Anti-Semitism at its Nexus with Israel and Zionism, noting that Israel is a magnet for and a target of anti-Semitic behavior. The document underscores how important it is for Jews and their allies to understand what is and what is not anti-Semitic in relation to Israel. Here are salient points from the Nexus document, focused first on 3 about anti-Semitic behavior. The Nexus document asserts that it is anti-Semitic to use symbols and images that present all Jews as collectively guilty for the actions of the state of Israel. It is anti-Semitic to advocate a political solution that denies Jews the right to define themselves as a people, thereby denying them, because they are Jews, the right to self-determination and or to deny them the right to physical safety and full human, civil, and religious rights. It is anti-Semitic to treat Israel differently solely because it is a Jewish state, using standards different than those applied to other countries. Here are further salient points from the Nexus document, focused this time on 3 regarding what is not anti-Semitic. As a general rule, the Nexus document says criticism of Zionism and Israel, opposition to Israel's policies, or nonviolent political action directed at the state of Israel and or its policies should not, as such, be deemed anti-Semitic. Next, using accusation of anti-Semitism as a tool to suppress criticism of Israel is dangerous on many levels. It distracts attention from bona fide anti-Semitism, infringes on the principle of freedom of expression, and militates against constructive dialogue and debate among people with differing opinions. And third, even contentious, strident, or harsh criticism of Israel for its policies and actions, including those that led to the creation of Israel, is not per se illegitimate or anti-Semitic. Two things I think are clear, and I'll close just by identifying them and suggesting that further discussion and dialogue about them are not just worthwhile, but imperative. First, the Nexus document suggests that the battle against contemporary anti-Semitism must be conducted carefully. Considerable needle threading is at play. Second, the battle against anti-Semitism must be conducted diligently and persistently. Wherever it exists, anti-Semitism does immense harm. What is anti-Semitism? A scourge that may never go away, at least not completely. It is a morphing menace that must be resisted accordingly.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you for your breadth and taking us right up to the very day, and some very, very important things for us to discuss within this seminar, but obviously beyond. And to introduce our third distinguished speaker, and we are so lucky this evening to have three of the leading thinkers in this field, whether recently in terms of Carolyn's work or over the past decades, to introduce John Pawlikowski, who is the Professor Emeritus in Social Ethics at the Catholic Theological Union, University of Chicago, and a Catholic priest of the Servite Order. He is the author of just 15 books, so it's slipping there, but to compensate over 100 articles. So we've got a remarkable sort of working library this evening. Amongst his many books, Christ in the Light of Christian Jewish Dialogue, and very much within a sort of James Parks tradition. Tonight, following very neatly from our first two talks, John is going to talk about uprooting anti-Semitism from Christianity. What needs to be done? John.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be with everyone here. Let me begin by indicating that in the fall of 2022, the respected journal Anti-Semitism Studies, which is edited in Canada and published by Indiana University Press, both primarily as an online journal, but also in hard copy. That journal, the editor requested me to produce a sort of think piece that would lead to a wider symposium on the question of the persistence of anti-Semitism more profoundly in Catholic Christianity. I did that essay, and it was then commented upon by 5 people of slightly differing perspectives from the Catholic community, both from Europe and from North America. So what I'm going to now offer is sort of taken in part from that whole effort. And so let me begin my comments by just reading in a way the very succinct introduction provided by the editor to my essay in that Anti-Semitism Studies article. Recent decades have produced important statements on the legacy of Catholic anti-Semitism. Such sentiments come from Catholic leaders in North America, from many countries in Europe, especially Germany and France, as well as from Australia. The Vatican signature statement, "We Remember," appeared in 1998 with a foreword by Pope John Paul II, who clearly denounced anti-Semitism as inherently sinful. Despite these statements, we still question whether the roots of anti-Semitism in the Catholic Church have been fully uprooted from Catholic consciousness. Put simply, my answer is no. Despite the genuine advances towards this goal that have occurred, certain steps still need to be taken by the Catholic Church before we're able to say that the work of uprooting anti-Semitism has been successfully completed. Areas that still need attention include the Christian approach to the so-called Old Testament, the image of Jews in the New Testament, the profoundly anti-Jewish theology central to the teachings of the Church Fathers, such as St. Augustine, the failure to acknowledge sufficient responsibility for the Holocaust, and the vexing message as to the need for the Church to evangelize Jews. Until these potential and persistent seeds of anti-Semitism are completely excised from Catholic consciousness, we cannot rest easy. Let me now take up some of those points that were in that symposium essay that I produced. Let me begin first with the whole tradition of the patristic writings, where what we basically call supersessionist theology was formed and ultimately validated. We are approaching a very significant moment in Christian history. In 2025, we will mark the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. And the Council of Nicaea was very instrumental in codifying for history these supersessionist thoughts that were generated by many of the Church Fathers. Now, why the Church Fathers came to some of those thinking about Jews and Judaism is still, to some extent, a mystery, because while there are roots of it in the New Testament itself, the New Testament is, generally speaking, with few exceptions, such as the mention of Jews as having Satan as their father in the Gospel of John and so on. On the whole, they are not as vicious and not far-reaching as what we find in the patristic writings. Now, the patristic writings that found in the works of people like Justin, Tertullian, Origen, and so on, began in the 2nd century. And it came to a kind of full-fledged development in the writings of St. Augustine. Now, it's interesting. I've looked at many commentaries about St. Augustine and his writings, most of them quite flattering, most of them quite positive. And in most of the volumes that I looked at, there is not a single mention of the very destructive theology of Jews and Judaism that Augustine formalized and probably was the single most important proponent in the course of Christian history. A theology that the late Father Edward Flannery, in his groundbreaking book, The Anguish of the Jews, led to approximately 1 million Jewish deaths over the course of Christian history. So that there has been massive silence about the contributions of the church fathers. Now, there were exceptions. There were a few church fathers who could be described as far more philo-Semitic. But Augustine's major points, which argued that Jews were to remain alive, and that's an important distinction from Nazism, one that Paula Friedrichsen, in her fairly recent comprehensive analysis of Augustine and the Jews, emphasizes very strongly. I generally agree with her. My only concern is that it can lead people to fail to see that while Augustine was not a Nazi, or did not espouse Nazi genocidal ideology and not Nazi ideology against the Jews, what he did espouse was still very horrific and led to tremendous Jewish suffering and death over the centuries. Augustine defined the Jews as a witness people. Witness to what? Witness to the failure to accept Jesus Christ as the Messiah and what happens to you if you do that. And what happens to you is that you are perpetually without any right to land. Land sovereignty, it cannot be ever maintained by the Jews because of this as kind of punishment for failing to accept Jesus as the so-called Jewish Messiah. And Jews, even though they were not to be killed in Nazi style, they were to be living in a marginalized and miserable condition in essentially Christian society. Now, there were moments when Jews and Christians lived in a far more positive relationship, but basically there was no theology that advocated that. It was kind of fundamental human dignity on the part of certain Christian leaders that made for, at times, a more livable situation. But in the standpoint of Christian theology, miserable and marginal were the major characteristics of the Jewish community. Now, the question is, as we approach the anniversary of Nicaea, is there a possibility of a formal repudiation of that perpetual wandering theology, that perpetual theology of marginalization that has been endemic to Christian theology over the centuries? In other words, can we do what the church has begun to do, not just the Catholic Church, but many parts of the Protestant community as well, to repudiate the doctrine of discovery and its impact on tribal peoples in various parts of the world, including North America. The Pope himself, in his visit to Canada, has affirmed the repudiation of that theology. Can we do something similar in terms of the repudiation of the Augustinian theology that has been so destructive over the centuries? I don't know. There's some difference between repudiating a teaching like the notion, the doctrine of discovery, and repudiate what in fact became a central dimension of Christian self-identity. From the very time I started my work in Christian-Jewish relations, I have emphasized that what the Christian-Jewish relationship touches the very heart and soul of Christian identity. It is not just a peripheral thing. It really was instrumental in many writings on Christology, for example, and so on. And is it possible for any religious community to formally repudiate major parts of its original self-identity? Not an easy question and not a simple question, but I think it's one that I hopefully, maybe we should begin to ask as part of our observance of the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. Let me also say something about the 1998 Vatican statement on the Shoah, We Remember. That statement was issued by the president. It was written and issued in the name of the presidency of the Holy See's Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews. It was a document that in summary tried to take up the promise that Pope John Paul II had made to the Jewish, when he addressed the Jewish community in Miami some 9 years earlier, that there would be a statement repudiating anti-Semitism and its roots in Christian history. It took a long time to reach that, but the document does include there was hope that the document would be a formal papal encyclical. It was not, but it was a statement from the Pontifical Commission, but it included a foreword by Pope John Paul II, which really did strongly condemn anti-Semitism as inherently sinful. However, that document was unfortunately ruined in many respects by the interference of then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who eventually became Pope Benedict XVI, and who was then head of the Doctrinal Commission of the Vatican. And no statement in the name of the Vatican could be issued without clearance of that particular Vatican office. And as I indicated already, Cardinal Edward Idris Cassidy, who was then president of that Papal Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews, was the basic author of that document. And in an extensive personal conversation I had with Cardinal Cassidy, literally on a bus between Eastern Germany and the Czech Republic, he explained to me the pressures that Cardinal Ratzinger exerted on him as a condition for releasing the document. And they basically undercut that document in terms of the real repudiation of anti-Semitism. First of all, Ratzinger insisted that the document had to insist that it was only wayward Christian preachers who led certain Christians astray in terms of the understanding of Jews and Judaism. It was not, this was a clear reluctance on Ratzinger's part to assert how central the teachings of contempt that were so central to the church fathers had impacted and Christian theology over the centuries. That impact was so strong that the late Canadian theologian Gregory Baum said subsequent to the Vatican II and the issuance of Nostra Aetate, that chapter 4 of Nostra Aetate on Jews and Judaism represented the most profound change in the ordinary magisterium of the church to emerge from Vatican II. I think Baum was affirming how central the teachings of the church fathers had infiltrated a basic self-understanding of Christianity, of who Christ was and what we mean by Christology today. And so basically, Ratzinger wanted to isolate Christian anti-Semitism to the periphery rather than to the central consciousness of Christianity. And that is simply false. I remember I was lecturing in Strasbourg, France, one year, and I went to see the famous cathedral with its facade, which depicts Christianity and Judaism in terms of two women. It's probably the most famous such depiction, but not certainly the only one. In fact, there's a small museum at Strasbourg that has photos or replicas of other such portrayals of the Jewish-Christian relationship. And I wondered what they would say, what the guide would say. I took the official tour, and we had a guide, and I was wondering what he was going to tell us when we approached that facade. I thought, my instinct was, oh, he's not going to say anything about it. He's going to pass. Well, I was wrong. He stopped the group and said, look up there. And he pointed to that, and he said, that represents the unity of Judaism and Christianity. Now, I wanted to shout out what is sometimes known as an expletive. However, a certain clerical propriety prevented that. I mean, it's nonsense. It doesn't. It represents everything other than that. Now, I'm not suggesting it should be removed, but I think that should be acknowledged, and that could be used as a real teaching moment in terms of how we have profoundly changed the attitude towards Jews and Judaism as a result of Nostra Aetate. So this unwillingness to really confront the centrality of anti-Semitism in terms of Christian theological self-understanding, I think still remains a strong issue, a central issue that needs to be further confronted in the church. Now, I don't have, I think that image, I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, basically portrays Christianity as a young, vivacious, very alive woman reading the New Testament, in contrast to a bedraggled, blindfolded, old woman representing Judaism. Now, that automatically sets up a condition which is the root of social destruction. And that is, once you proclaim your own religion as superior to every other religion, you are laying the seeds of not only, in this case, anti-Semitism, but of basic social hatred by reasons of this inferiority declaration. I think we need to find some ways of expressing the Jewish-Christian relationship, which may allow, as my colleague John Borelli Georgetown University has said, would allow for distinctive understandings of in religious traditions, but distinctive need not include superiority. If we don't get rid of the superiority understanding, I think the roots of anti-Semitism and other forms of social hatred will remain. Pope Francis, in his visit to Abu Dhabi several years ago, where he met with the imam of the main Muslim university in the world from Cairo, proclaimed, and this was a real breakthrough, that meeting moved us even beyond Nostra Aetate. He said that God has many faces, and no one religion has seen all of God's faces. And that is a new admission that Catholicism, Christianity, is something indeed to learn from other religious communities. It doesn't have everything it quite needs for its full understanding of God. And that's certainly the need to learn from Judaism, where we have the closest tie, becomes quite important in that kind of affirmation. Finally, let me just say a word about, I think, the issue of conversion. We also have to confront that issue of the need for Jewish evangelization. Certainly in Catholicism, formal attempts to evangelize Jews have pretty much gone by the wayside, at least in North America and Western Europe. But nonetheless, I think we have to reflect more on this, because again, evangelization can be a way of affirming superiority. Otherwise, why ask someone to leave their particular tradition and join Catholic Christianity? Cardinal Walter Kasper, when he served as president of the Holy See's Commission for Religious Relations with Jews, did begin the process of trying to confront that issue. And he made some important statements in print on the need that there is no need to evangelize Jews because they are already in the covenant. There are a lot of limitations to the way Kasper has presented that, and I'm not going to go into them here, but at least he took the first step in acknowledging that. And I think that also needs to be followed up, because while we're not formally converting people in Catholicism, we haven't really completely resolved the issue. And if you were to ask most Catholic bishops the pointed question, do Jews need to be converted? I suspect you would get many answers. The majority of answers might still be yes. And so those are some of the issues that I outlined. They all need more attention. But again, I'm grateful for the opportunity to present these concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you all three speakers. We have about 10 or 15 minutes to open up for questions, both from Southampton, where we're enjoying a huge amount of food and drink, or not, post-COVID, but also online. So if I could ask people to think of questions, maybe while people are do we have any? No. Whilst people are sort of formulating, just, it is very difficult, this current moment, particularly over the last year, intensively. So to have any form of optimism in this area, do you see things where there is progress, where there is some hope that we can see progress being made particularly in this field of Jewish-Christian relations. So I don't know if anyone of the three of you would like to start.
Well, I would just say, I think to some extent, the bonding that has developed in both the Christian and Jewish communities, while it's under tremendous pressure, and there is a book coming out called Stress Test, which has been generated by John and his collaborator Carol Wittner. I think there's stress, but there's still not willingness overall to break up the conversations. I think some of the conversations are simply avoiding the issue. Here in the Chicago area, we have had the emergence in the last year of a new Christian Jewish Muslim encounter, which has drawn good attendance and was initiated initially by the Islamic Center, which is the Islamic Center of Chicago is Bosnian run, which is makes it a little bit different than those run directly by Arab Muslims. But it's had some success, but it's kind of avoided a direct confrontation with the issues in Middle East politics right now. So,
Tony, I'd like to respond just a little bit here to your question. I think all of us who work in this field are in a moment of deep concern about where things are going and where they're headed. And on the downside, just for 60 seconds here, I think people like me who have worked so long in Holocaust studies and Holocaust education thought that the work we were doing would quell anti-Semitism, and that, as I mentioned in my remarks, was too optimistic. It didn't play out, but it still is important for Holocaust education and research to go forward as a way of protesting anti-Semitism, just as it's important, as John and Carolyn's presentations point out, it's important for Christians to deal with the anti-Judaic and anti-Semitic aspects of the Christian tradition. But these are not going to solve the problem long term, which has, as I argued in my talk, has morphed into a kind of new form of anti-Semitism, which is swirling for good or ill around the Middle East in so many ways. So that's a problem. The hopeful sign that I see is that the Hamas-Israel war has brought the issue of anti-Semitism front and center, and it's clear that this is a real issue that has many facets about it, and it's not going to be solved overnight. But at least I think we have attention focused on anti-Semitism presently in a way that could have a good outcome. It's so multifaceted as an issue now, I think, and the fact that it's being centered in that way is at least a step in the right direction.
Thank you, John. Can I ask if we've got Carolyn, do you want to add?
So I'm sorry, what?
Do you want to add any thoughts, or are
Okay.
you happy to?
Well, I think just very briefly, I agree with everything that the others have said. I think also we have there, as John said, we have there's a multiplicity. So there's so many different things going on so many different fronts. We still have this very anti-Judaism is still very much alive when it should not be, and people within the churches, as I think Father Pawlikowski pointed out, even as far as up as bishops, have not, it has not trickled down. Some of the statements from the Pope, some of the learnings that have generated statements of repentance has not trickled down through the denominations, and so there is still this part of anti-Jewishness that is instilled almost as normalized attitudes in Western culture. So I think that is a huge point that I have no idea how to get over, but it's there and it's ready and waiting to hear all of the new charges that are being made. And I agree with the Dr. Roth that it's a mixture and it's viral.
Thank you. Any more questions from the room or from? We have one from Mike Cooper, who's online. Mike, I don't know if you want to expose yourself.
No, I don't think I do, but I will turn my camera on. Hello, and thank you all for your very thoughtful contributions. I want to just go off on a little tangent, if I may, for a moment. And heaven knows that there is more than enough mileage in the general topic you've been discussing tonight, and the focus of the Parks Institute itself, which is Jewish and Christian relationships. But I wonder what all of this tells us on a broader front about interfaith relationships and the difficulties and indeed aggravations and disasters with other faiths. So one might think, for instance, about what there is in all of this as a lesson for Hindus and Muslims in India, or between Jews and Muslims, or any one of a number of other areas of religious friction, shall we say. It seems to me that there is some universal stuff here, though, as I say, there's plenty to keep us going just on Judeo-Christian relationships. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you very much, John. And maybe we can end with each speaker in turn reflecting on Mike's comments. Maybe starting with you, Carolyn.
I think this is really out of my area of expertise, and I would like to pass to our other two speakers. When we start talking about the broader view of interfaith relations, I would pass to them.
So,
well, I'll take a crack. John Pawlikowski is the expert on this, but it seems to me that although it's a fragile and small and maybe overmatched kind of thing to say, there is no substitute for dialogue, for people who are willing to engage, to talk to one another, to explore ways forward that can be cooperative and collegial and inclusive and pluralistic. If we don't have a lot of that, then I think the situation truly is bleak and dark, because it will only exacerbate the we, they, us, them divisions. So this is what's so challenging. I have a colleague who says this is a time when interreligious dialogue has never been more difficult, but it also is a time when it has never been more promising and hopeful and necessary. So I guess that's what I would say, and where I would want to, put my time and energy going forward.
I would just, myself, I would reaffirm the question of eliminating superiority definitions of my own religion. Until we get rid of that notion that my religion has to be superior to, I think we're in a problematic situation. And that applies across the board. And to the very applies. I mean, Christianity is not the only religion that claims superiority. I think just about everyone does. And can religion live with a situation in which it doesn't have to claim superiority over other religions? I think is the real challenge before us. Another challenge is certainly in terms of the Catholic and Christian community. There is a strong emphasis in many parts of global Christianity that Christian-Jewish relations is merely what they call a North Atlantic concern. And North Atlantic concern includes Australia. But nonetheless, that it's not a real concern of the church in the global South. I think that has to be challenged, particularly since in the Catholic Church, the population is really shifting very profoundly to the global South. And we may see the global South producing more and more leaders. And if Christian-Jewish relations remains peripheral to that form of Christianity, I think the likelihood of resurgence of some of the classical stereotypes of Jews and Judaism, which engender anti-Semitism, is a real possibility. So I think I've tried to address that issue of why the Christian-Jewish relation is, because it's so central to Christian self-identity, getting that Christian self-identity right in terms of Jews and Judaism is relevant for Christianity and in Asia and Africa.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you all three speakers. I know that one of the ambitions of James Parks was to have the Parks Institute as a global hub, and I don't think he quite, although he was a very far-sighted man, quite envisaged the internet enabling us to do this. But it's been wonderful to have our three speakers brought to us today. So thank you very much, and thanks very much, Carolyn, for bringing the panel together as well. It just remains for me to announce the next seminar. We've got a very rich, varied seminar program this year. And the next one is also online, but purely online, which is the 22nd of October, our normal 6 o'clock slot. And it's Umar Bloom, Migrants in Banda on the Cine, and that will be a very different, but I think very important seminar as well. So thank you again, all three speakers and everyone that's been with us today in person and online. Thank you.